the first webinar that we're doing this week as part of Anti-Bullying Week, and we're going to be focusing on peer aggression in early childhood. My name is Claire Monks, and I'm based at the Institute for Lifecourse Development at the University of Greenwich. I'm going to just ask Amy to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Amy Moon, and I'm a researcher at the Institute for Lifecourse Development at Greenwich as well. Hello, everyone.
Thanks, Amy. So just want to say thank you to the University of Greenwich and the Institute for Lifecourse Development for hosting this webinar this afternoon, or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. And also big thank you to our co-investigators, Maria, Kat, Hatice and Rosario as well. So as I said, this is the first of our events for Anti-Bullying Week 2024. So Anti-Bullying Week is a week within the UK where we focus on looking at bullying and issues around bullying. And it was established by the Anti-Bullying Alliance, which is an alliance of children's charities in the UK. Now, obviously, bullying is an issue that happens all year round, and we do work on this behaviour throughout the year.
I just need to have this on.
But what we wanted to do was really take the opportunity this week to share some of our latest findings in relation to peer aggression. And as I said, this is going to be one of several events that we'll be hosting across the week and across the year. And I really hope that you'll be able to join us at some of these events. We're going to pop some of the details of some of the other events that we're hosting in the chat at some point during the talk. But we've also got information towards the end of the presentation where we'll share a little bit more information about some of those activities and how you can get involved if you'd like to. So why are we here? Well, basically, we're obviously all very concerned about bullying and the impact it has on individuals. We're going to be focusing on children, but obviously bullying can happen at any point in your life. And can quite severely impact you as well. If we look at some of the figures for England and Wales as an example, so the crime survey for England and Wales reported that bullying is a significant issue for children and young people in England and Wales. And what they found was that an estimated 1.5 million children who are kind of pre-adolescents or early adolescents reported having experienced in-person bullying. So when we talk about in-person bullying, we're basically making a distinction there between that and cyberbullying. So they're talking about 35% of these young people, or young people within this age range, experiencing bullying. And obviously we know not only from research but also from very tragic reports in the media that there can be really significant impacts of bullying on young people's well-being, be that their emotional and physical well-being, but also on things like their academic outcomes. And a relatively recent study by Halliday, for example, showed that about a fifth of children reported that they were impacted emotionally a lot by bullying. So it is clearly something that really concerns them. Now, what do we mean by bullying? So the Anti-Bullying Alliance have quite a nice, clear definition of what we mean by bullying. So we have the definition there, but it's essentially talking about a behaviour that is often repeated over time, and it's intended to hurt somebody. So it might be hurting one person or a group, and it could be by a group or by an individual. What's important within this behaviour is that it involves an imbalance of power. So that imbalance of power means that it's actually difficult for the individual or group who are being targeted by the bully to escape from further victimisation. And we know that bullying can take a variety of different forms. So it could be physical, it could be verbal, or it could be psychological. And as the Anti-Bullying Alliance definition indicates, it can be in a face-to-face encounter, but it could also involve a cyber aspect, an online aspect. Last year, the UNESCO definition of bullying was published, and that kind of reinforces some of the issues that are raised within the Anti-Bullying Alliance definition. So talking about that imbalance of power, that it's often repeated, but what they're highlighting there is that there's often the imbalance of power could be driven by societal or institutional norms, and that the behaviour causes harm to not only to the individual or group who are targeted, but potentially to the wider community as well. So it's demonstrating the sort of broader potential of harm of bullying to the school as a whole. So I'm just going to move you, Amy, sorry. So why would we focus on early childhood? Well, we need to really understand how these behaviours develop and what we might see among younger children. Now, we know that most children start school between the ages of 3 and 6 in most countries. So if you look at the education systems within different countries, they do vary. You know, some countries children start school or formal schooling earlier, others are in more play-based or nursery settings, but it's usually within that kind of age range where children, most children start school, particularly in developed countries. And this age group is actually a really important period for our social, emotional and cognitive development. For a lot of children, this might be the first time where they're regularly going outside the home, they're regularly interacting with a group of children who perhaps they didn't know before. So that's important in terms of their, new social interactions. But also we know that children are experiencing important cognitive developmental steps at that point as well. Particularly, they're starting to develop their perspective taking skills. They're starting to understand other people's motivations and their own motivations as well. But given that, there is actually less research focused on peer aggression and aggressive behaviour among the peer group during this period compared to what we know about bullying during middle childhood and adolescence. Now, what we do know is that aggression towards peers is reported during this period, and it's reported across a variety of different settings. It's reported in different countries, so not just focusing on a UK context. There have been studies kind of internationally looking at these behaviours, and we find that it is reported among a variety of different settings. There are some similarities in the types of behaviour that are displayed by children in early childhood in relation to those behaviours that we would see perhaps in middle childhood and adolescence. But there are some important differences as well. So when we're looking at some of the behaviours that are displayed, young children, they will display things like physical aggression. So when we're talking about physical aggression, it's things like hitting someone or pushing them, for example. They also show things like verbal aggression, so they might call other children names or shout at them, for example. But most of the behaviours that they display at this age are direct in nature rather than indirect. So that means that they occur in kind of face-to-face encounters rather than indirect, which would describe something that happens perhaps via a third party or behind someone else's back. And when we think about things like relational aggression, so relational aggression is a type of aggression that is aimed at damaging peer relationships, essentially. So it might include things like telling someone they can't join your groups, that they can't play with you, those kinds of behaviours. So that would be quite direct in nature. But it also includes things like spreading nasty, untrue rumours about somebody else. So that would be more indirect. And we don't really see those kinds of behaviours with younger children. We tend to see the more direct forms rather than the indirect ones. And it's been suggested that that might be because we don't see the indirect types of behaviour till perhaps children are kind of moving into middle childhood, because they perhaps require more advanced cognitive skills than younger children possess. When we're looking at the stability of behaviour during early childhood, there's also some differences to what we might see within middle childhood and adolescence. So if we think about bullying, those two definitions that we looked at the beginning, they both mention repetition of the behaviour as being usual within bullying. And when we look at the stability over time of aggressive behaviour, we find that young children who are behaving aggressively tend to show this behaviour over time. They're showing repeatedly over time. But there is less stability for being the target of that aggression. So the children who are receiving the aggression could be a variety of different children. And it's often quite a short-lived experience for children at this age of being the recipient of the aggression, even though the children who are behaving aggressively are doing so over time. And there's a suggestion that children who are behaving aggressively at this age are being less strategic in who they are behaving aggressively to than we might see in older groups. So when we're looking at bullies, for example, during adolescence, bullies tend to target particular individuals who may be less well liked by their preferred peer group. So by doing that, they're enhancing their social status with the preferred peer group. We don't see that type of thing with younger children. Younger children perhaps are behaving aggressively to a variety of different individuals over time and not really doing so with any kind of clear repetition. And so that's led some people to argue that some of the behaviours that we see in early childhood couldn't really be described as bullying at this age, but they may be precursors to some of these behaviours later on. Another difference that we see in early childhood is in relation to the group nature of peer-directed aggression. So during middle childhood and adolescence, the peer group plays an important role in the maintenance of bullying. And this image hopefully illustrates some of the behaviours that we might see during middle childhood and adolescence in a bullying scenario, for example. So here we have the ringleader bully and an individual who's being targeted by the bully. Around the bully, there are other children who maybe have pro-bullying attitudes. So they might help the bully by joining in, perhaps when someone else has started it, or they might reinforce the behaviour, perhaps as this one is, filming what's going on, or laughing, or encouraging in some other way. We also have children who are behaving pro-socially. So they're showing defending behaviour, and they might support the individual who's being bullied, or go and tell someone what's going on, or help them in some other way. And then we have other individuals who try and keep out of the situation. So they may be bystanders or outsiders, showing those types of behaviours. So what we find in early childhood is, through observational studies, through studies where we're talking to children, where we're talking to teachers, there's less evidence for these more peripheral roles or peripheral behaviours in early childhood. We tend to see that there are certain individuals who are being targeted, some who are behaving aggressively, and some who are behaving pro-socially and supporting others. But we don't tend to see any of these sort of reinforcing behaviours or assisting behaviours with any consistency. Now, that's not to say that these group dynamics aren't starting to emerge in early childhood, because if we talk to children about who they're friends with, who they hang out with at school, we find that children who are quite high on aggression tend to form friendships with other children who are quite high on aggression as well. So it may be that we're starting to see some of these patterns, but they're not clear at this age group. So what can we do to intervene to support children in developing kind of positive social relationships with each other? Well, there are a number of anti-bullying intervention and prevention programs that have been developed precisely to address bullying in middle childhood and during adolescence. And these have been quite well evaluated, some of them. For example, Gaffney and colleagues did a meta-analysis where they pulled together the findings of a large number of anti-bullying programs, and they found that there was some evidence of success in these programs in combating bullying. So they measured that by whether they decreased levels of bullying or they decreased levels of victimization, or both. Another meta-analysis by Jimenez Barbero and colleagues also pulled together research findings from evaluations, and they also looked at what point would be good for intervention, what age group had the most positive impact. And what they found was that evidence to suggest that earlier intervention may actually be more successful than later intervention. But there's the caveat to that, was that most of the studies that they looked at only included children from age 7 and up. And if we think back to, the findings that I've just talked about, we know that children younger than that are showing some behaviours that are aggressive to others. So it may be the case that actually intervention may be even better earlier than 7. So this is what we were quite interested in looking at a little bit more in depth. So there are a number of programs that are aimed at decreasing aggressive behaviour among children in early childhood. But we couldn't find any sort of clear review or meta-analysis to really look at what interventions exist, what do they involve, and importantly, how effective they are in decreasing aggression or increasing pro-social behaviour, those kinds of things. And we were particularly interested in school-based programs or nursery-based programs, because there are a lot of different kinds of programs. Some of them are parenting programs, for example, but we wanted to focus on kind of more school-based programs because we felt that these might be more conducive to a sort of broader rollout to the general population, should they be effective. And we were very much focused on interventions for children in these early years that I mentioned, so between the ages of 3 and 6, when children are first starting school. I'm going to pass over to Amy now.
Thank you. So this is where we get to our study. So our aim was to conduct a systematic review and meta-analysis of interventions which aims to address aggressive behaviour in children between the ages of 3 and 6 years. Next slide, please, Claire. These were our, I've just put the search terms there just to give you some reference, but basically what we were looking at of including in this particular systematic review and meta-analysis are peer victimisation interventions, prevention programmes, or anything sort of anti-bullying in topic where children are aged between 3 and 6 years. Importantly, we weren't looking at any sort of any children with a particular pathology, so we weren't targeting children with SEND or clinical populations. As Claire mentioned, we're very, very interested in school-based programmes rather than things that would happen at home, with the idea that these would be easier to roll out if we found some success. We were looking at sort of the outcomes being a decrease in child aggression, reduced victimisation. But we were also looking at, we weren't excluding any type of intervention as long as it was school-based. So we're including things like teaching children pro-social skills, managing emotions, executive function. So like a whole range, a range of different interventions were included. I've just included this prisma diagram, which is just an illustration of the number of studies that were included when we ran our searches. So we had no fixed start date, the beginning of time, but realistically, papers came within the last 20 years. So we had publications up to the 28th of March 2024 was when we closed our search. And we looked at, we searched EBSCO and Web of Science. There was 5 researchers all involved in the screening of papers. So we identified the papers initially with our original search terms and went through a process of refining those searches and excluding studies using automated removal of duplicate records, for example, and narrowing those down and making sure that we weren't looking at the same results for each, so we weren't continually looking at the same data but written in multiple different journal articles. Obviously, the nature of academia means that we will, to some extent, have, you publish successful results. Is sort of nature of academia, so we do kind of have to bear that in mind. But all in all, for the systematic review, we identified 88 studies in total. So the types of interventions that are mentioned in those 88 studies identified 36 different intervention programs. So a real vast array of different intervention programs for this age group. That actually do target behaviour and issues at this age group. So we've got things like Second Step, Head Start Ready, Paths, and Incredible Years. Most of the programs, so this was our search was completely global. So most of the programs we identified were actually developed and evaluated in the US. There were some exceptions, such as WITS, which has been used in Canada, and the IRIE classroom in Jamaica and BPROX in Switzerland. So a real array of different countries where interventions are taking place, and a real array of different intervention programs that are available. Also, the focus of programs varied. So for most of the programs, they really focused on supporting the development of social and emotional skills in children, such as conflict resolution and deal with those interpersonal issues, really enhancing children's communication skills so they can build friendships successfully at this kind of young age, and also enhancing empathy, understanding things from another person's perspective, emotion regulation and impulse control. Examples of these were the Second Step, the Paths and Incredible Years programmes. Others focused directly on classroom behaviour management approaches for teachers, as the IRE classroom and the BPROCs. But there are also some broader interventions which involved organised games at break times and working to enhance home-school links. So sort of trying, there might be some programmes while we were looking at school-based also included some element of parental involvement or things that parents might be doing with children at home to kind of build on those behaviours that they were trying to teach in schools. Also, the delivery mechanisms of programmes varied quite a lot as well within the interventions that we found. So many of them would involve teacher training and curriculum support, but as I said, some of them also involved an element of parental component, such as Head Start Ready. Most of the interventions, rather unsurprisingly, were delivered by teachers, and they'd been specially trained and provided with support materials. Some were directly given by researchers or trained volunteers, but it's not surprising that if classroom led, it was largely teachers. So we also conducted a meta-analysis. So of the 88 studies, we looked at the 27 papers that had sufficient amount of data to be available for meta-analysis, so we could get a significant amount of response data was available for. So of the studies in review, some of them weren't included in the meta-analysis, which is why we only had 27, and that's because the data was provided by adults such as parents and teachers, and we were looking specifically at the children, focus on the children in this particular meta-analysis. Having said that, it's not to say that we wouldn't in a future meta-analysis look at the data provided by adults. It's just for the purposes of this paper today, I'm just reporting the meta-analysis in terms of the focus on children. There was also the absence or incomplete reporting of essential measures. So we might not have, with the meta-analysis, we needed sufficient standard deviations and means for calculating the effect sizes. And also if we couldn't get hold of the author to obtain permissions if there was any missing data. So yes, we had 27 papers in total. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I've mentioned this before, 27 studies included. A variety of dependent variables. Unsurprisingly, with all this host of different studies and different interventions, we also have a lot of dependent variables, mainly pro-social and different aggressive behaviours that are measured. Meta-analysis yielded 59 effect sizes, so some studies were reporting multiple dependent variables from the 27 studies. The individual effect sizes from each study were weighted to calculate the global effect, so we could get a kind of a total effect of these interventions at improving, reducing aggressive behaviour and improving pro-social behaviour in young children. So the meta-analysis yielded a medium significant effect, showing that it was a positive effect of the intervention and prevention programmes at this young age, and over 95% of the research showed improvement in participants in terms of their post-test variables compared to pre-test before intervention. But I have kind of mentioned this earlier, that we are kind of limited with the fact that we have to be a little bit careful because of the fact that we only tend to, in academia, we tend to be, there's a bit of a bias towards reporting positive results. But I think that this, this is a huge majority. This is ultimately a really positive result for making that early intervention, making the argument for early intervention or prevention in terms of bullying behaviours. So we have limitations. We weren't able to examine the differences between interventions. So we couldn't, because there were so many different types, we couldn't look at, say, for example, the Sure Start versus another program, and we couldn't identify the active ingredients because they are so diverse in terms of the different programs. Not to say we couldn't do that in future research, but not at this point. We focused on child reports of outcome measures, and there's obviously a possibility to explore the results further and look at teacher reports and parent or carer reports. Also, many of the programs were developed and evaluated within an American context. So it would be really interesting to see whether in a different context, such as the UK, whether we would have the same results. Ultimately, the results here show that early intervention programs to address children's aggressive behaviour in early years of school have some positive effects in promoting pro-social behaviour and decreasing aggression. So I think kind of more work needs to be done, and we need to kind of identify those active ingredients, basically, to really see what can be kind of pulled out and sort of help support schools and nurseries at kind of young ages to kind of put these prevention plays in play. Thank you. So that's the end of our discussion on bullying, but we will take some questions in a minute. I just wanted to say before we move to the discussion section that we have lots of anti-bullying events this week. Many of you may already be signed up, but if you're not, Claire is going to put, I will put, because she can't quite access this at the moment. But in a second, I'm going to put the different events with the links into the chat, so you can sign up from there. We have the Repair and Reconnect, Bullying, Emotionally Based School Avoidance and Restorative Practice webinar tomorrow with Rachel Quine and Dr. Rachel O'Connor from the Royal Borough of Greenwich. They're just fantastic. So that will be on tomorrow, the webinar. That's online. Wednesday, we have a peer mentor celebration event for children aged 8 to 11 years. This is a fantastic event that we held last year as well. So we get to give some certificates and really celebrate the young children who have been turned into anti-bullying ambassadors within their schools in South East London and Greenwich. We also have on Thursday we have an anti-bullying roundtable in the morning, which some of you may be coming to. If you have if you are interested in being part of, this is essentially a working group where we are looking at issues, all things anti-bullying and sort of recommendations for policy, and you would like to be involved and you are fairly local because it is an in-person event, we would love to have you engaged with us. So please do email me. My details, and Claire, our details are at the end of this presentation. So please do contact us, and you would be very welcome to join in this or future events. We, as you know, Anti-Bullying Week is a really amazing week for us to talk about all things anti-bullying. But the work doesn't stop in Anti-Bullying Week. We continue all year. And this working group is just one of the ways that we are trying to engage with everybody, practitioners, academics, young people, everybody who's got an interest in this. And we do this throughout the year. We also very excitingly as well on that day have a hybrid event. So it's going to be available online as well as in person. And we've got Professor Peter Smith, who is internationally renowned expert in all things anti-bullying, to talk about some of his work and a content analysis of school and anti-bullying policies in England, which should be amazing. And finally, on Friday, we have Kidscape are hosting a webinar on the complex puzzle of friendship and bullying, providing avenues for intervention. That is on Friendship Friday. Again, this is another webinar. So I will put the links in the chat, and hopefully, if you haven't had a chance to sign up to some of those, you can join us for the rest of the week. But yeah. Thank you. I'll let you just move on to the last slide, Claire, and then I will there's our contact details. And I will now just pause the recording so we can start answering some questions, because we've already got a couple of things in the chat.
Thanks, Amy.